Welcome to episode 109 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. Today's episode features a discussion with Tim Houlihan, co-host of Behavioral Grooves. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today features an interview with Tim Houlihan, co-host of Behavioral Grooves podcast and the Weekly Grooves podcast. He's also the founder of Behavior Alchemy, a consultancy helping companies to incorporate behavioral economics into their businesses. Sound familiar? We'll talk about some of his work and past projects, including one with Dan Ariely, whom you've heard on episode 101 of the podcast and mentioned many other times before on this show as well. And speaking of that episode, Habit Weekly, which you heard about in my interview with Samuel Salzer on the show, has come out with a list of the top behavioral science content for all of 2020 so far. There were 4 individual podcast episodes that were called out and featured there as the best of the best. And my interview with Dan on the Shape-A numberless scale was one of those 4 top podcast episodes in all of behavioral science and habit stuff this year so far, according to Habit Weekly. It's such an honor. Thank you so much for including us on that list. And if you haven't listened to that episode or Samuel's yet, I highly recommend them both. There are links to both of those, as well as Tim's website, both his podcasts and company, and any other important articles or episodes we discussed today within the show notes for this episode, which can be found within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/109. If you're already a member of the Brainy Business list, you receive an email from me every Friday with links to all that week's new content, including podcast episodes and new articles, so you can also access the show notes directly from there. If you're not yet on that list and would like to be, simply sign up for any freebie and you'll be automatically added. And for those of you in the States, you can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy to 33777. You'll be added to the list and get instant access to over 50 freebies as a thank you. In life, I think it's important to find joy and humor in the small things. And so when there was an opportunity for some of that with this episode, we took it. You see, I was a guest on the Behavioral Grooves podcast for episode 109 of their show. And even though this episode was recorded several weeks ago, I think it's been almost 2 months now, Tim and I agreed it was worth holding on to for a bit so we could have the crossover episode of sorts be the same number. There's a link to that episode, number 109 of Behavioral Grooves, in the show notes for this episode, number 109 of the Brainy Business. Again, small thing, but it makes me smile, so here we are. In our conversation today, Tim and I are going to focus on goals, something you've heard covered a lot on the show. And while he has some similarly aligned tips, the stories and studies he references are mostly going to be new to the show. And in my opinion, reinforcing tips to help you find the right way to achieve more of your own goals, it's a good thing to revisit in as many ways as we can so everyone can find the thing that resonates with them specifically. I'm sure you'll find some interesting and useful tips and tidbits in this conversation with Tim. But instead of me telling you all about that right now, I'm going to go ahead and introduce him so he can share his wisdom. Tim Houlihan, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Melina Palmer, thank you so much. I am so glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here as well. I gave a little bit about you in the intro, but would love if you could just tell the audience about a little bit about your background and what it is that you do and how it relates to behavioral science.
Great. So 20 some years ago, I got involved in a business designing incentives and employee engagement programs, rules, rewards, things like that. And that led me down a path into kind of falling in love with behavioral sciences, and left the corporate gig about 3 years ago to pursue my own thing. And so now I have a consultancy that's really focused on the application of behavioral science. It's pretty darn great, let me tell you.
Sounds like it. It sounds a little bit familiar to somebody else that I know, maybe. It's like you're telling my own story, I guess, a little bit, but from a little different perspective.
We come from the same cloth, I think.
Absolutely. And that's for the audience listening, we'll definitely reference. But Tim has a podcast as well that's called Behavioral Grooves. And actually, you guys have two now. So Tim and his co-host, and I was a guest, I believe it was episode 109 that I was a guest on Behavioral Grooves. So our shows are both talking about behavioral science, but from very different perspectives, I would say, where mine is that very, very business focused, and you're doing a lot of interviews with researchers and things like that.
Exactly. We decided to use Behavioral Grooves as a way to sort of expand our own learning. And it's become a little bit more of a public service kind of a podcast that's about the application of behavioral science, both in work and life. And we like to talk to researchers. That's kind of our number one group, because we think that they're on the cutting edge. They're on the front lines of figuring out what the problems are. And then our second group of people we talk to are practitioners who are pretty thoughtful in the way that they go about doing their work. And so we really like talking to practitioners. And then there's a third group of people that we talk to, and we call them accidental behavioral scientists.
I love that.
It's just like retailers and restaurateurs have been doing behavioral science for a long time. Just marking down a price and leaving the original price there is a great anchoring tool. Restaurateurs that seat the very first customers that come in the door up front by the windows. Those are classic behavioral science applications. And so the accidental behavioral scientist is someone who's doing all those things, but just not with all the nomenclature and the terminology and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And then I love finding those and working with my clients. I'm sure you have the same, where you're able, I'll say all the time, like, tell me about something that worked and you don't know why, something you were sure that was going to work and it was a total bomb and you don't know why. And we can kind of dig in and see what was going on under the surface and give some framework to all of what that is. So I love that accidental behavioral scientists. So many of us are.
Well, yeah, so many are, and so many are doing a really great job. And so we've been lucky enough to run into and highlight some nonprofits, some pro-social accidental behavioral scientists on Behavioral Grooves, and just kind of great. I'm very grateful for that.
Awesome. Well, I love that. And we are going to be talking about goals today, which is something that I love and talk about on the show quite a bit. And I love that we have, we have a pretty similar philosophy on some of the ways of looking at goals. But I liked when we were talking about this in the pre-call that we have some, like, a little bit different language and way we talk about it, which I really like to showcase because you never know what's going to resonate and actually hit with somebody who's listening on the show. So the way that I've talked about goals and the advice that I've given is to think as big as possible when you're setting the goal and the vision. You want to just reach for the stars as much as you possibly can. And then when you're looking at actually moving forward and it's time to go take some action on those things, that you want to go as small as possible when you're looking at execution, so you can overcome optimism bias and other factors that come in, and just be checking, one thing at a time. It's the, tortoise and the hare sort of approach, small steps to get to those big goals eventually, and you just chip away at them one day at a time. So how do you talk about goals and how you break those up and some of the brain science behind them?
Well, first, let me just say we are on the same page.
Right. Yeah.
I'm here to contradict you or try to persuade someone to say, no, don't believe Melina. We're fully on the same page. So the way I tend to think about them is that those big goals are BHAGs, or big, hairy, audacious goals. And that we need those to light up. The neuroscientists talk about how these BHAGs light up our prefrontal cortex, our frontal polar cortex, the part of our brain that gets our imagination engaged. And so those big goals are really great at at engaging us. Like, I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, or, I want to achieve something very long-term, very, very big. And that can help drive us and shape our decision making as something that kind of sits in the background of our subconscious for a long time. That's really the wonderful thing about those BHAGs. And then, as you talk about, if you don't break those down into smaller, more actionable parts, which I call bricks, that if you don't have the bricks, you can't build the cathedral.
Right.
You have to be thinking in terms of, well, planning. I mean, that's probably maybe the most important part of any goal development, is the articulation of the plan. And without really good planning, then the bricks don't go into place in the right way. And the more discrete, the more specific you can be, I think that really the better off you're going to be at achieving those goals. The more discrete you can make it, the more vivid you can make it. And of course, all that SMART goal stuff, that it all works. And I think that something I would just like to add that self-selected is often not included in a lot of goal discussions. Now you and I talk about this sort of as a shorthand, like, of course, people are self-selecting their goals, but I don't think that should be just covered over. I think that people need to say, this is my goal. I'm going to own it. I'm going to take ownership of this and really make it mine, because that's an important part of achievement as well. Actually self-selecting. There's good research on participatory goals compared to assigned goals, but self-selected goals are really the richest kind that we can have.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about that. So I would see that as, so I am currently, and I guess my husband and I are training to do a half marathon here in the next few months. It's an interesting situation. And I think this gets into some of the motivation in that we just got the kind of emails so we don't know if it's going to be in person now. And so they're doing where we're now discovering this whole world of virtual runs where you go and do the, in this case, 13.1 at your own day using your own app, and they send you like the medal in advance to assume that you're going to do it, and you get to pick your own course, and it's I ran the XYZ marathon at my house instead of going to do that. And so there's this whole, does it feel as motivating when you're not showing up, getting your brain over the being there on the day, crossing the finish line, they're timing it, and everyone else did the course. But then you say, like, why does that actually matter? Does being there matter in achieving? If I run 13 miles today, why is it any different if I run it on the day to say that I did a half marathon, and how that all comes into play, which I know isn't exactly self-selecting on goals, but there is some of that with the visualization and the dream and the thing I'm building. It's now having to kind of revisit the cathedral of what's being built and training for, and deciding how that vision gets reshaped so I can modify my bricks to match what the world has allowed for here.
I would also think that it's going to influence your visualization, because you talked about being with other people, being at the event, imagining what the weather might be like, how you might dress for it, what it would be like to cross the finish line, what the T-shirt and medal might look like, and what it might feel like to actually be handed that T-shirt or medal as you cross the finish line.
Right.
All those things are part of the visualization that light up that the neuroscientists tell us that's what really lights up our brain. That's what makes it such a wonderful and effective goal, is that visualization. So when you take all that out, or as in your case, you might have to readjust all of it. It might just be, well, what's it going to be like on the on the treadmill?
It's an interesting setup. And actually, now we're able to shift our perspective on the goal, and where we've been talking about, so all the negatives, right? So we're able to kind of have our loss aversion take hold and shift into this other, like taking ownership of the new goal, and say, so we've been having conversations just over the last couple of days of, well, driving to a place to go run is no fun. And then you have to stand around for 2 hours and find parking and get up even earlier. And in this case, where we have like 3 days to do the run, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or some of them it's 4 days. And so if we happen to wake up on Friday and feel like, I'm feeling good, let's go do it, then you just go do it. And if you don't, then you can do it Saturday. And so you can fit it in with your own time frame to, feel good about it. And so, and now there are all these virtual runs. There's a bunch of Harry Potter ones and like funny ones. So we're looking to say, well, if we have to do a virtual one, how can we now make these into like lemonade of the world, right? To find the cool ones that we want to do and then showcase medals that you like and think are fun.
Social media is going to help there.
I know.
Very helpful in getting people to stick to their commitments and to achieve their goals. But man, I think that there are some challenges with opening up and saying, well, you can do it anytime within these 3 days. I think about Dan Ariely's research with college students to say, you got 3 papers to do this semester. You can do them anytime.
Right.
You can turn them in on the last day. You can turn them in on the 5th day. It doesn't matter. And when he looked at how well people did, both the quality and the consistency of actually achieving was much lower with the group of people that he gave infinite variability to compared to those who he said, okay, there's these 3 times that you need to turn in paper 1, paper 2, paper 3.
Right.
Those deadlines work to our advantage in a lot of cases.
And it's an interesting, so I would love to get your perspective on, so having the self-guided overarching goal, which I guess is like, I've set my goal in the case of Dan Ariely's research you're talking about there would be, I've set the goal that I'm going to graduate from college with XYZ degree and, behavioral economics or whatever it happens to be. And one of the things I have to do along the way is to then taking specific classes, passing those classes, doing the paper, then we're getting into the bricks of getting that all done. So self-choice on the overarching goal is more effective. But when left to our own devices, we will procrastinate and do a really bad job and bike shed our way through the class to where even if they're very arbitrary deadlines, and like you said, the teacher doesn't care when they come in, but if you're not given those dates, people struggle and have a hard time keeping to the steps to reach the ultimate goal.
Well, we might call it choice architecture. That the way colleges are set up is that you've got very specific final objectives, but there is some flexibility in the way that you execute on those. And so I did some goal setting research actually with Dan on a bunch of years ago with a telco client that we gave the sales reps in one condition the opportunity to earn something at wherever they ended on a scale. So, if they ended at 10 more sales or 20 more sales or 50 more sales, then they earned something. And by the way, each was relevant to their individual performance. These weren't just general guidelines. These were all individualized. But wherever they ended, they would earn that reward. And then there was a separate group that had to choose, that had to make a selection and a commitment to a specific level. And there was a penalty if they didn't reach that level. Mm-hmm. There was a penalty for underachieving, and there was no benefit for overachieving. So they couldn't say, I'm going to choose the lowest level, but if I end up actually achieving at the highest level, I'll still get paid out at that level. No, it would still only get paid out at the lowest level. Mm. So there was some interesting aspects of that. And the people who were in that choice architecture environment where they could choose among one of these 3 levels, again, individualized for each person, they performed about 43% better than the people who could just earn wherever they ended up. Right.
Which is incredibly significant.
It really is. It was just huge, right? To see how powerful this tool is to engage someone in this, this is a kind of a choice architecture sort of an environment. I've thought about it as totally self-selected, but as you're bringing up, Melina, I'm not so sure that it is completely self-selected because they weren't picking from an infinite, universe of potential. They were picking from, one of 3 options.
Right. And I know from when we had talked about this in the prep, that this was in a call center environment. And I worked in a call center for a while, very early on in my life. And I remember, so there were, there are the personality types of people that are in a call center, I think, and in any role. It's just how personalities fall, I guess. But it was a very small team doing these after hours calls, and we had goals that were that you would take. I think it was 12 calls per hour that you were going to get through as you're there, and that's what many of us would see as the minimum to say that you hit that 12 as a number. And there was a point where there were just 3 of us, and this was an airline call center very early on in online booking, and we were having to help walk people through how to do all of this. Okay. And so if one of us gets stuck with somebody, then you're on the call. Sometimes they're 45 minutes long and they won't let you off the phone. And then the other 2 are totally bogged down. And there was another, and I remember it was me, a guy named Eric, and then on the other side of the room was a guy named Derek in this random phenomenon. And Eric and I were like jamming through calls, and when one would get stuck, and then this other guy, Derek, when he would hit the number that they told him he had to hit of 12 calls, he would put himself on call work, basically turn himself off until the end of the hour and say, I've done what I was told that I needed to do, and I'm not going to answer anymore until it's like the new hour starts. And so for me and Eric, we're saying, wow, you're a real jerk. Really, the only person you are hurting in this case is the 2 of us that are having to try and do, and the people on the hold, is absolutely not the spirit of your call goals, but the way people see it is different. And so if you can reframe the message and they're picking what they know they can do, potentially that can help shift some of those differently minded folks, the Dereks, to have a different approach.
We might even go so far as to say that the environment or the context was shaping his decisions.
Exactly.
So the way that he was being paid, the rate that he was being paid, the way that the objectives were communicated to him, all those kinds of things were contributing to a much more calculative mindset.
Right.
And certainly not appealing to his intrinsic motivation or any kind of social norm about I could be helping out my fellow employees, my coworkers. He's totally missing that. And part of it could have, at least a part of it is the context in which that was happening for him.
Right. Absolutely. It makes me think too about just our, in setting up goals in schools and the way that, and we don't need to get into the whole drama like testing and assignments and sitting in desks all day and all of that. But, it's not overly built and very much in the opposite direction of, it's not really set up for a lot of that intrinsic motivation. And potentially the reason that when people then got to Dan's class and couldn't motivate themselves is because they've been trained this other way for their whole life.
Yeah, boy, education is a whole other bailiwick. There have been times when I really thought, all this goal setting stuff should easily apply to student work, and I thought that I actually might give it a try on my own children. Bad idea. Let me just say that, just bad idea.
Well, and that's now that so many of us are having to homeschool our own children, you realize some of the difficulties in that and how we're not the greatest authority figures as teachers as we are in other areas of their their life and time. But it is a really interesting one. And I would say for anyone who is interested in learning, some other options for that, a book I recommend all the time, A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger. He specifically talks about using questions instead of answers, and some schools that have come up with alternative models to teaching. And I know some of my clients that are, in a private school space that are doing some of this as well, helping, kids come up with their own goals. And in the learning process, it's a really interesting piece. And I'll link to that in the show notes. Okay, so we have talked about the different types of goals and the way that you're going to motivate yourself versus, when it's self-selected versus not. What else can you share about the way that if someone is picking a goal or sticking to goals? What sort of advice do you give to people if they were looking to set up goals? Is it different for business versus personal type of goals, or do they kind of go hand in hand?
That's a good question. I'm not expert on being able to tell the difference between a personal goal and a business goal.
I feel like they're kind of the same.
It feels like it's the same.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there might be some research to suggest differently because of the nuances. I don't know. I'm just really not sure about that.
Yeah. Well, I make the recommendation. Do you give any limits on goals that people should have as far as not having too many? I think a lot of us. Yeah.
The fewer better. No more than 3, actually.
Yeah. You're speaking my language, Tim. I limit it at 3 as well.
Well, and they can change. There was there was a CEO that I worked with a bunch of years ago who had 3 objectives 3 goals every quarter. And every quarter he went back and said, okay, did I achieve these? If I didn't, am I going to re-up on them? And I thought that was pretty good to have these quarterly goals. So I think that time sensitivity is really important, whether it's BHAGs can be very long term, but goals that you're going to set that need to be achievable, I think they need to be not just time specific, but time manageable, because there is a boundary on our ability to get things done. And the longer the time horizon, I mean, let's say you set a goal in January to earn X amount of dollars by December. Well, this year in this environment, that's a really hard goal to fulfill. You're going to have to readjust because the world has changed. So the idea that you set year-long goals, I think, are very, very difficult. I'm much more comfortable with month-long goals or quarterly goals. If you've got something really big and you need to do a quarterly that is just going to take a lot of time, great. But the shorter the goals, the more likely you are to achieve them. And we need achievement in our lives. We rely on the dopamine spurt that we get from the achievement in order to propel us to take on the next goal.
Right.
And to have confidence to do it.
Yeah, I would think just in going to whether it's the cathedral analogy or if we were going to be talking about even just like say that you bought a fixer-upper of a house, and then you have your ultimate goal of this is going to be my dream home in 10 years. And if you have to do, say like this year, we're able to work on we have to redo all the framing, or we're going to just work on the kitchen, or, so that your big goal is having this dream home, and that's at least 10 years out. And then you have to plan these smaller pieces, which might be then the year goal or the quarterly goal. And then the bricks, quote unquote, are all the little tasks underneath that. But until you kind of break it down and have a full vision, then it's just busy work. Then you're just doing a bunch of things that feel important. I just did an episode on bike shedding, so we definitely
Well, we can do so many things to contribute to our goals if we're thoughtful about the goal and thoughtful about our daily activities and have a plan. Without a plan, it's the old failing to plan is plan to fail. So those things are really, really true. And it really helps to have a solid plan, to have a short-term perspective on it. And then, of course, having it be measurable. So if you say, I want to work, the big goal is 10 years, fix up the house, short-term this year, fix up the kitchen, then the more detailed plan you can have for the process you're going to take to think through the potential eventualities. And I love the way Annie Duke talks about, thinking in percentages. It's okay to have goals to say, it'd be really great if we could get to 80% in the next month of this particular thing, because we are always overestimating our ability to get things done in a particular period of time. Always.
Yes.
So give yourself a break.
Right. Yeah.
If I get to 80% of this in the next 3 weeks, I'd be happy. I consider that an achievement.
Absolutely. And that's where I think breaking it into the small bits, the tiny thing where if you're saying, well, today I've been doing a lot of work recently with my membership group on lead magnets. And so it's a really good time to set up your new opt-in or lead magnet or whatever it happens to be, that you're attracting people to your list, and people now have some time that they didn't before, where we're in, lockdown and whatnot. And when you think about, okay, I know I need to do a lead magnet, and you just have it as lead magnet on your list, you will never do it because where do I start and how do I do the research? And we were talking about even just researching the scheduling software as things that people look at making this shift. And so as I've been talking through, I have something ridiculous now, like 60 different opt-ins from episodes of the podcast and my ebook and a free course and all these things. And I didn't go into the world thinking I was just going to be opt-in freebieing my whole life. But there are so many, and then having the different system and how it integrates with the website, and then where does this go, and how many emails should I have, and how do I write them, and when do I send them? And you can very quickly start to really spiral out of control and never get the thing done. This is our, bike shedding piece, even with the goal of the lead magnet. If you don't break it down and say, today I'm going to decide if I'm going to use MailChimp or ActiveCampaign or Asana or Constant Contact or whatever it is. And then that's all you have to do today is that one thing. And then tomorrow, the thing you're going to do is this other thing. And then you can just kind of take those one step at a time. And before you know it, you have everything done and you're on the other side.
Yeah, it's a great little snowballing approach, right? To
Absolutely.
Just start small. Start with something that is totally achievable, and if the first thing is just open up the website, just make a decision between all those options and just go to that website. That's all I need to do today. But I need to do it before 9 o'clock, or I need to do it between 3 and 4 o'clock. I mean, you can get that specific, and that does take a big burden off. It's like, if that's really the only thing you get there, and you get to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you've got your reminder, and now I go and I open up the website. It's like, well, I can do more than that.
Right. And you're allowed to add more, but you don't have to, right? You can have finished your thing. And then the rest of the day, this is kind of another version of anchoring. And so I have talked about where if you set up your goal, your day, when you have your to-do list with 85 things on it, and you think, oh gosh, I have to get through these 5 things, and you only get 3 of them done, you feel like you failed. You had a bad day. It wasn't great, lame. And then if you look at the other and say, I just have this is the one thing that no matter what, I have to get this one thing done. And you got 2 other things done on your list, you feel amazing, right? And so this relativity and setting the right anchor is then putting you in a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle, depending on the way you put those together, for sure.
That reminds me of sort of a dual aspect of goal setting, because there is research to say that if we set our own goals consistently, it can be easier for us to set lower goals for the sake of achievability. And that anticipatory goal, to have a buddy, a goal setting buddy, to have a coworker, to have a boss challenge us, can lead to higher goals from time to time. However, among white collar working people, knowledge workers especially, they tend to be harder on themselves. They don't need someone from the outside saying, no, Melina, you need to get those 3 things done today. And you're like, I'm not going to be able to get those 3 things done today. I can get one of those 3 things done today, because they're monsters. There are boundaries, and we tend to actually be pretty good about assessing our own boundaries. That doesn't apply to everybody. That's not a big universal thing, but I think that there are segments of the population who are thoughtful, who have experience in goal setting, both the success and the failure, and tend to be better at both establishing and achieving goals than my 6-year-old child.
Yes. I got a couple of those littles around, but it's a little bit different. Yeah. I would love to revisit some of where you were talking there. And I know that earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned you used to do work in incentives and motivation, that, in that side. And I love the conversation on incentives, because it is such a conundrum and a difficult space, to where it's so counterintuitive to everything we think should work tends to backfire and make things worse. I believe I've talked about on the show before, probably actually there's an episode on incentives, so I'm sure I gave this example in that one, and I will link to it in the show notes, but was with the daycare, where they had people were bringing their kids in late or picking them up late from daycare. And so then they put in the fee to try to deter people from doing it. And it was, $2 or $5 or something small to show that this was an inconvenience on the staff. And what they ended up having then was a huge increase in the number of people that would pick up their kids late, because you could say, oh, well, it's only $5. I can stay here and do this stuff at work. When you move it out of this social obligation to a fee-based system, it completely shifts the mindset, and the adherence is just totally different. So it doesn't always incentivize people in the right way.
Yeah, I'm a big fan in the corporate world of using non-monetary incentives. It's too easy for us to be very calculative, right? Just like you said, you could quickly do the calculation. Oh, the fee for running late for 5 minutes is only $10. For running, if I'm 15 minutes late, it only costs me $5. That's cheaper than what the daycare hourly rate is. I'm just going to go ahead and be late because I'm happy to pay that out of my pocket. Whereas in the corporate world, if you say, then here's an incentive for you as a salesperson to sell more. And that's if that's a monetary fee, we quickly do the calculation and say, well, what's it worth to me? Is that a good deal? Is it worth my time and effort? What's my probability of success? Which makes me want to go back to just review really quickly that an incentive is both the rule and the reward. That sometimes people think of incentives just as the reward or just as the rule, but it is actually both. Yana Gallus has some great stuff at the University of Southern California in San Diego. She's done some work with Bruno Frey on the effectiveness of reward and rule ratios. That's really, really good. And so if we think about how we're going to get a salesperson, how a manager wants to get her underlings on her team excited about selling more, then the best way to do that is to engage their emotions. And that happens best with a non-monetary incentive, something that isn't cash-based. And I've seen a lot of success in working with those. Again, I did a project with Dan where we looked at what would happen if we gave call center employees cash amounts to sell more throughout the month. And the values were like $60, $120, and $250. And we gave another group of call center employees with the same objectives, same amount of effort, but gave them things like binoculars and toasters and slow cookers and
pizza parties. I know are a thing that go over very well as well.
Pizza parties are all
it's bizarre, but everybody loves the pizza party.
and so they had these different kinds of rewards. And when asked, the call center employees said, I want more cash. I only make about $35,000 a year. I want more cash. I will work really hard for more cash. And yet the group that was rewarded with slow cookers and binoculars and and bicycles, things that you think, well, come on, really? Well, guess what? They actually worked about 30% more and delivered more effort and more results than the group that was paid cash.
Right. And I know it's something to do where, the thing when you get cash and whatnot is so many people, I think, end up then you dream that you might use it to save for that big vacation or buy something for yourself, but then you get the money and you feel like, well, I better put gas in the car or, do these little tidbits, which are responsible and good and people should do those things. But when I've seen these where I knew people that, some of the rewards and gifts and things that they get are, it's like a designer handbag or pairs of shoes that they wouldn't have bought for themselves because it feels like it's too much of an extravagance. And when you get it, it just feels so much bigger. And I know I've talked about this on the show, it's probably on the episode on reciprocity, but giving that gift feels so much bigger and better. And you're just more thankful for it than the monetary value of what it would have cost to buy the thing, which is silly, but our brains are silly, as we know.
Yeah, thank goodness, right?
Yes.
Well, nobody ever went to the gas pump and as they're filling up are saying, oh man, I'm going to love this tank of gas because this is what I earned through that incentive program. Right. I'm using that extra cash to really, oh man, my car's just going to be so great. No, but you get to, like the handbag, you get to reconsume that. Every time you pick up the handbag, every time you take stuff out of it, you put stuff in it. That is a reconsumption action that allows you to zip you right back to, I earned this.
It's kind of like you're earning, but it's also like you won it. Right. Yeah. And so you get to re-win the thing every time. And so visualizing this achievement at the end of the I want the handbag. This is also, I'm sure, why all the kids in the schools are, you have to sell umpteen zillion magazines and rolls of gift wrap to get a cheap garbage toy that as the parent, we're going, this is I could buy you that for $5. That thing is nothing. But as the kid, you want to go and knock on doors and call all your friends and do all the things to be able to to earn some silly, chintzy thing, which
totally
makes no sense.
Well,
but, it does.
I don't know anybody in the days when we used to actually go to work. I don't know anybody who would have photographs of their last paycheck or their last bonus check on their desk. They have pictures of their family, or especially friends and family in specific environments, not just a photograph of the family. Typically, it's the photograph of the family on a trip, at Glacier National Park or Yellowstone or some magnificent thing that they want to remember. And we reconsume that. Our brains take us back. The neuroscience behind this is so strong that we go right back to that place and that event. And if that was a trip that we won, if that was an event that the company gave to us, that just reinforces my connection to the company at the moment that I am looking at that picture. And by the way, so much of this is subconscious. We are not even aware of it, but that's what's happening. It's reinstating those neurons and synapses in our brains and reconnecting to, there's me and my spouse. There we are in Yellowstone. That was a trip that I won. I won that because I worked really hard. I worked at this company. I'm doing my job. I've got extra gas in the tank to make this happen. I'm going to work harder today.
They appreciate me. They did this thing for me. It helps with that kind of ongoing loyalty and putting something together. And so that, I think, is a lesson for anybody too, where if you do have employees and you're giving things like that away, is it the camera, or if it is the trip, and then do you give them the frame or a coupon or, whatever it is, a gift certificate so they can get their photos printed? Because whoever these days actually goes and gets photos printed, or putting them into the screensaver or something to where you can be re-triggering that memory over and over again, even where they don't necessarily notice or, remember, to be reinstating that value that you provided to them and helping that to last for a longer period of time and increase motivation and incentivizing them on this longer path, really drawing that effort out is with a very small amount of expense and added. But it just makes them so much happier, to work with you. It's a very much a win-win situation.
Yeah. This is just one other story that just popped into my head. I remember interviewing a senior sales leader in Detroit a bunch of years ago, sitting in his office. And I was wearing a Swiss watch that I had gotten recently that was very nice. And he noticed it and he asked me about it. He said, would you take it off? He said, I want to look at that. And so I do. And he said, this just reminds me, I would love to have a Panerai watch, which is an Italian. It's a Swiss watch made for the Italian army. It's the official watch of the Italian army. Kind of an esoteric, watch, but they cost about $7,000 or $8,000. And he was a very successful guy. And I just looked at him. I said, "You want one of these? Well, why don't you just buy one?" He said, "It won't mean nearly as much as if I can win it in a contest." I thought, wow, he totally got it. He totally got it.
I am waiting to win this thing someday.
Yeah, someday. And so he was hoping to, that the VP of sales would actually say, we're going to make this one of the prizes, because that would totally engage him. And this is kind of the tricky thing, right? Engagement and what we desire is highly individualized.
Right. So, but that's if you get to know the team and what they care about. And if you have, if you're setting up incentives and you do have just because you're allotted a cash amount that can be done for incentives. I know I used to take my team, I used my money we would walk to the Starbucks, which was, 5 minutes away, and take them to get a coffee or, whatever it was that they wanted, just randomly factoring in that surprise and delight, and say, we've been working really hard. Like, let's all go to Starbucks. Like, it's on me. I got it. We'll go ahead and do this. And that was something they really valued, because they would go to Starbucks every single day anyway. And so able to pop in there.
They didn't pay for it.
Right. Right. And so just randomly like, no, we get whatever you want. I got this, that it made it feel like a really great thing to spread out. Whereas if I would have just given somebody $4 or, whatever for the drink they're getting, it's kind of, yeah, thanks. Thanks for this.
It would have been a great insult to them to give them $4.
Exactly. Yeah. You've been working so hard. Here's $2 in quarters for you.
Yeah, but if you work really hard next week, I'll give you another $2 and then go to Starbucks.
Right. It'll be amazing. I love it. So many great lessons in just how to think about goals and motivation and incentives and the way we're motivating others versus ourselves. I love it. It is complex, but it all makes sense when you really sit and think about it. So I appreciate you talking through it with me, and so that the audience can kind of understand all the ways that we think about this and all the research and things that we've done and how we motivate ourselves. Do you have any really big goals you're working on right now?
Oh.
I know I talked about my half marathon, so I wasn't sure if maybe you had something that was out there in the world. And if it's not right on there, you don't have
to.
Make it through the day.
I'm a songwriter, and so I have a musical kind of career on the side. And the band hasn't had any gigs since the shutdown. We haven't been able to rehearse. We haven't been able to get together and write songs. And we said, forget that. We're going to keep pushing forward. And so we are back in songwriting mode and recording mode in our individual houses.
Ooh, awesome. Have you done any of the videos like we've been seeing where, it was everybody in the band? I remember, my kids, they like the Backstreet Boys, which is weird because it's such an old throwback, but so where they did the thing where it was like all 5 of them in different locations, and then you're able to see, and for all the different bands performing in their different spots and doing the videos. Have you put any of those together?
That's coming. That is coming, yes. But of course the big magic behind all those is that the recordings are already done. Those are never the live.
Sure.
Never live.
Right. Yes.
Technology to make that happen these days. So.
Yeah. Well, from when I was on Behavioral Grooves, and the grooves of Behavioral Grooves is because they always talk about music and things like that, which when we were talking about this show, I was like, this is amazing. Bring all my favorite things together. Why don't you into this amazing space? So,
and your amazing Spotify playlist.
Yes. Which I shared the link to my John Mayer. Oh, it's a Pandora. It's a Pandora one. Yeah. Where people are able to listen on that. And it sounded way cooler than it is to say I've been curating this on Pandora for 10 years or whatever it is. But
sounds good though.
Yeah, it sounds real fancy. That's framing at work for sure. So for anybody who wants to learn more about you and Behavioral Grooves or the consultancy, where should they go to connect with you and to find you?
For the podcast, we're at www.behavioralgrooves.com. And for my consultancy, it's Behavior Alchemy. So that is behavioralchemy.com.
Got it. We'll have links in the show notes for sure, so anybody can go ahead and find you. And I would say thank you so much again, Tim Houlihan, for joining me on the show. It was great talking with you today.
What a blast. Thanks so much, Melina.
Such cool and interesting tips and insights, right? I love how Tim explains his work, and you can tell he has a real passion for everything he does. And as you heard from Tim, he is a musician, which is why both of the podcasts he co-hosts with Kurt Nelson have the word grooves in their name. He got a degree in guitar performance, so that's pretty awesome. And they talk about music with all their guests and have jam sessions when they debrief on the topics of the day. Definitely up my alley. So it was great to be a guest on their show as well. As we touched on briefly here, I talked about my background as a vocalist while I was on their show. And in case you were curious about my John Mayer Pandora station that we talked about just a touch, here's a story about that. So Tim and Kurt ask their guests if they listen to music while working or not. And as I answer most questions, I said, it depends, and explained that there's some work where I really need to focus, and having too much going on in the background really overwhelms my conscious brain, especially when it's songs that I really like. And so it can be really distracting, and I won't listen to anything a lot of the time. However, I mentioned that I had been curating a John Mayer Pandora station for about 10 years and learned that that sounds a lot cooler than it is. So essentially, when I used to write grants for very, very, very long hours, I would have Pandora on in the background. And after hundreds of hours on that station and lots of thumbs ups and downs, for the most part now, it can play, and I enjoy it very quietly in the background. I almost never have to give feedback anymore. It plays everything from the Beatles and Tom Petty to Christina Perri, the Goo Goo Dolls, and of course, John Mayer. In my opinion, it's the perfect mix of white noise and a little pick-me-up that has a fun line or something I can sing to give me a little mental break and then keep moving forward on whatever project I'm in. It is proving very effective in my book writing process. Now I'm kind of back in that grant zone and now able to incorporate some noise canceling headphones that I got for Christmas. So super, super awesome. If you want to listen to what I listen to while working or are just curious to check it out, I've put a link for you in the show notes. Did you know that you can share your playlists from Pandora? If you ever do a thumbs up or down on that list, it's going to become yours, and we won't have exactly the same thing anymore, but that's really the beauty of it. I think Pandora may need an episode one of these days. What do you think? Anyway, there are links for my Pandora station and, of course, so you can connect with Tim and check out the Behavioral Grooves podcast, Behavior Alchemy, or connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter. You'll also find links to episodes on all the concepts we touched on, even if they weren't called out by name, during the conversation today, including those on social proof, herding, setting Brainy goals, anchoring, choice architecture, surprise and delight, as well as past interviews with Dan Ariely, Nir Eyal, Scott Miller, and more. The links for all that great content are waiting for you in the show notes within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/109. Thank you again to Tim Houlihan for joining me today and discussing goal setting, incentives, and motivation. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and learned some valuable tips to apply into your life and business. Next week, episode 110 will be a Behavioral Economics Foundations episode on a really eye-opening concept called survivorship bias. And know this, it's probably not what you think. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Molina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.